Here is a truth that most AI governance discussions ignore. The majority of AI incidents do not happen in the lab, they happen in production. They happen 6 months after deployment when the model starts drifting. They happen when a business unit adds a new data source without telling the governance team. They happen when an AI system designed for one use case gets repurposed for another. The reason those incidents happen is that organizations treat AI governance as a deployment gate rather than a lifecycle discipline. ISO 42001 fundamentally challenges that approach. In this episode, we are building governance across the full AI system lifecycle, from the first requirements conversation through to the day you decommission the system and dispose of the data. Let's walk through it phase by phase. Let me paint a picture that will feel familiar to many of you. An AI team builds a recommendation algorithm. It goes through testing. It gets deployed. The project closes, the team moves on, and the AI system operates in the background for the next 2 years. Nobody has reviewed the model since deployment. Nobody is monitoring for drift. The training data is now 18 months old, and the model is making recommendations based on a world that no longer quite exists. That is not a hypothetical. It is a pattern I see repeatedly in financial services, healthcare, retail, public sector. And it is exactly the governance failure that ISO 42001 Annex A.8 is designed to prevent. The Annex A.8 controls span the entire life cycle, from inventory through design, development, testing, deployment, monitoring, maintenance, and eventual retirement. No stage is exempt from governance. No stage is left to the discretion of the development team alone. Think of lifecycle governance like a construction project. You do not just inspect the building at the end. You have governance checkpoints at foundation, framing, fit-out, and handover. Each checkpoint is a quality gate that nothing passes without meeting defined criteria. That is exactly the model ISO 42001 requires you to build for AI systems. Let me walk you through the 6 phases of the AI system lifecycle as ISO 42001 frames them, and give you the key governance question for each phase, because that is what will anchor your implementation. Planning and requirements. The governance question is, what is this AI system intended to do? For whom? Using what data? And what are the prohibited uses? Design. The governance question is, have we built in fairness, explainability, and privacy considerations before a single line of code is written? Development and testing. The governance question is, have we tested for bias, robustness, and security before we consider deployment? Deployment. The governance question is, do we have access controls, monitoring, and a rollback plan in place before go live? Operations. The governance question is the system performing as expected, and are incidents being captured, escalated, and resolved? Retirement. The governance question is, have we disposed of data appropriately, revoked all access, and captured lessons learned before closing the system? If you can answer yes to all 6 questions with documented evidence, your lifecycle governance is in a strong position. The planning and design phase is where most organizations invest the least governance effort and pay for it most later. Design decisions made without governance input create technical debt that compounds throughout the lifecycle. Let me give you a specific example. I worked on a project where an AI system was designed to assess job applicant suitability using a natural language processing model trained on historical hiring decisions. The governance team was not involved in the design phase. By the time we reviewed the system pre-deployment, we discovered the training data reflected 15 years of hiring decisions made by a predominantly male management team. The model had learned to prefer characteristics associated with successful candidates, most of whom were men. That bias was baked into the architecture. Removing it required a near-complete redesign. 2 months of rework that a 2-hour design review at the start could have prevented. Ethical considerations in design are not an afterthought. They are a cost reduction strategy. Building fairness, explainability, and privacy by design is always cheaper than retrofitting governance after the fact. ISO 42001 Annex A.8.4 requires you to document the design process, purpose, intended users, data sources, prohibited uses, and the ethical considerations assessed. Make that documentation a gate, not an afterthought. The development and testing phase is where governance often hands off to the technical team and where governance gaps grow. ISO 42001, Annex A.8.4 and A.8.5 require that development follows approved methodologies with documented workflows, and that testing is structured, recorded, and evaluated against defined criteria. What does AI-specific testing look like? Bias testing is mandatory. You need to test model outputs across relevant demographic subgroups and document whether disparate impact exists. If it does, you need a documented mitigation decision. Fairness evaluation goes hand in hand with bias testing, asking whether the model performs equitably, not just accurately. Robustness testing. How does the model behave when inputs are adversarial or out of distribution? Security testing. Is the model vulnerable to data poisoning, model extraction, or adversarial manipulation? And critically, all of this testing must be documented. Not just the past results, the failures too. An auditor reviewing your testing records wants to see that you tested for things that matter, found things that failed, made explicit decisions about those failures, and either remediated before deployment or documented a risk acceptance. Testing records with no failures should actually increase auditor scrutiny. It suggests tests were designed not to find problems. Deployment is a governance event, not just a technical event. ISO 42001, Annex A.8.6 requires a controlled, documented deployment process with defined access controls and a rollback plan. Let me stress the rollback plan specifically, because I have seen organizations deploy AI systems where the only way to reverse a deployment is to rebuild the previous version from scratch. That is not a rollback plan. That is a recovery project. Before any AI system goes live, your deployment documentation should include who has authorized the deployment and on what basis, what access controls are in place, what monitoring is active from day one, what the rollback trigger conditions are, and what the rollback procedure is. This is a checklist that should exist for every AI deployment, not just high-risk ones. Operations governance under Annex A.8.7 and A.8.8 covers ongoing monitoring and maintenance. Monitoring means tracking defined KPIs continuously, not reviewing them at the next audit. Maintenance means managing every model update, data change, and parameter adjustment as a formal change event under your change management process. This is a discipline that requires active enforcement. Development teams, understandably, want to move fast. Governance requires them to document. Finding that balance is an ongoing management challenge. Every AI system has an end of life, but most organizations are unprepared for it. The retirement phase under ISO 42001 requires deliberate governance at closure, not just a switch off. What does proper AI system retirement look like? An end-of-life plan that should actually be drafted at system design, before deployment, not after the decision to retire. Data retention decisions. What training data, operational logs, and output records need to be kept? For how long and under what policy? Secure deletion of data not required to be retained, with evidence of deletion. Access revocation. All user and system access removed, confirmed, and documented. And knowledge preservation. Lessons learned from the system's life cycle captured before the team disperses. That last point, knowledge preservation, is consistently undervalued. An AI system that ran for 3 years has accumulated governance knowledge. What risks materialized, what controls worked, what changed over time, what the next generation of AI systems in that domain should be designed differently. If that knowledge walks out the door with the project team, you lose the institutional learning that ISO 42001's continual improvement requirement is designed to capture. Document it deliberately. Annex A.8.1 requires you to maintain an inventory of all AI systems in scope of your AIMS. This sounds administrative. It is actually strategic. Your inventory is the foundation of every other governance process: risk assessment, impact assessment, lifecycle management, supply chain oversight. If a system is not in the inventory, it is effectively outside your aims, ungoverned, unmonitored, and invisible to your audit program. Your inventory should capture at minimum system name, AI owner, business purpose, data inputs and their classification, output types and their use, risk classification, current life cycle stage, and last governance review date. This is not a spreadsheet you fill in once. It is a living register that is updated whenever a new system is deployed, modified, or retired. Assign maintenance responsibility explicitly and review the inventory at management review to ensure it reflects reality. The fastest way to fail an ISO 42001 certification audit is to have an AI system in production that is not in your inventory. Auditors will ask, how do you know this is complete? Your answer must include a process for identifying new AI systems, not just a spreadsheet that is updated when someone remembers. The final topic in this episode is one of the most practically important in AI governance: human oversight. ISO 42001 requires that oversight mechanisms are appropriate to the risk level of each AI system. The EU AI Act makes this mandatory for high-risk AI systems, and frankly, it is good governance for any AI system making decisions that affect people's rights, safety, or significant interests. There are two primary models. Human in the loop means a human reviews and approves every AI output before it has effect. This is appropriate for high-stakes, irreversible decisions: credit denial, medical diagnosis support, criminal risk assessment. Human on the loop means the AI acts autonomously, but a human monitors and can intervene. This is appropriate for lower stakes or time-sensitive operations where reviewing every output is impractical. What matters for ISO 42001 purposes is that the choice of oversight model is documented, justified by a risk assessment, and that override procedures are tested, not just written. I cannot count how many organizations have beautiful override procedures in their documentation that nobody has ever actually tested. If a human needs to override an AI decision in a production environment under time pressure, the override procedure needs to be something they have practiced, not something they are reading for the first time.